The movie revolves around two married couples, Nigel and Fiona, and Mimi and Oscar. It all begins on a cruise ship, where British couple Nigel and Fiona are on a trip to strengthen their marriage. They spend time getting to know the other passengers, including Oscar, an American writer confined to a wheelchair, and his young wife Mimi. Oscar tells Nigel his story of love and passion with Mimi, which gradually turns into a destructive and painful addiction. Oscar begins his story with how he first met Mimi in Paris, where he was living while trying to realize himself as a writer. He was mesmerized by her beauty and irresistible charm when he saw her on a bus. Oscar felt a flash of strong attraction and could not get her out of his mind. After a few chance meetings, their paths cross again, and Oscar decides to approach her, starting a conversation. From that moment, their passionate affair begins. He describes how Mimi became the embodiment of his deepest desires. She was for him all the passion, pleasure, and meaning of life. Their relationship was filled with vivid moments of physical intimacy, and it seemed that their love knew no limits. Oscar, reliving his memories, talks about how his life was filled with meaning because of Mimi. Their sexual relationship was intense and all-consuming. Oscar details how they explored their limits together in search of new sensations and pleasures. At first their connection was passionate and mutual, but gradually Oscar began to lose control of his feelings. Passion was turning into a compulsive addiction, and eventually Oscar felt that he was beginning to lose himself. However, despite this, he could not break the bond. Mimi became more and more mysterious and unpredictable, and their relationship moved to a new level, full of tension and fear. Over time, Oscar began to realize that his attachment to Mimi was beginning to destroy his inner world. Passion, which once seemed to be a source of happiness, turned into endless agony. Mimi, feeling her power over him, began to manipulate Oscar, playing on his feelings and weaknesses. Their relationship ceased to be mutual. Now Mimi controlled the situation. Oscar, blinded by his love for her, allowed her everything. At some point Mimi became cold and indifferent, her interest in Oscar fading. She no longer responded to his attempts to restore the former passion, but Oscar continued to cling tenaciously to their past, hoping to bring back the days when they were happy together. In telling this story to Nigel, Oscar opens up his soul, recounting the most painful moments of his experience. He recalls how one day Mimi suggested that he change their relationship by adding new elements to it, such as power and submission games. For Oscar, this was a new step into the abyss. He succumbed to her influence and agreed to everything she suggested, losing all sense of self-respect and dignity. Mimi took complete control of their relationship and Oscar became her plaything. She enjoyed watching him suffer as his love for her gradually turned into a painful agony. When Oscar, being completely depressed and devastated, realized that he couldn't take the relationship anymore, he decided it was time to end things. However, Mimi didn't let him walk away so easily. She started stalking him, playing on his feelings and making him come back to her again and again. Every time Oscar tried to break the bond, she would find a way to bring him back, reigniting his passion to then push him away again. This game continued until Oscar finally broke down. He no longer saw a way out of the situation. Over time, their relationship became completely unbearable. Oscar, losing his health and strength, began to gradually deteriorate as a person. Mimi continued to manipulate him, but no longer because of love or passion, but because of the simple pleasure of control. At some point their relationship reached its climax when Mimi decided to leave. Oscar was left alone, broken and crushed, realizing that he had lost not only Mimi, but himself. He had completely lost the meaning of life and could no longer continue to exist in his previous state. At this point Oscar ends his story, and Nigel, shocked by what he has heard, finds himself immersed in his own reflections. He begins to feel an attraction to Mimi, despite Oscar's warnings. The story he hears from Oscar only fuels his interest in her. Nigel sees in Mimi not only a femme fatale, but also the embodiment of those hidden desires that he did not dare to express in his marriage to Fiona. This attraction gradually takes hold of him, even though he realizes he is on a dangerous path. Meanwhile, Fiona also begins to notice a change in Nigel's behavior. She senses that there is tension between them and begins to suspect that something is going on. Their relationship, which initially seemed stable, begins to crumble under the pressure of new circumstances. Nigel, infatuated with Mimi, becomes increasingly distant from Fiona, and their marriage gradually loses the harmony they tried to restore on the cruise. Mimi, realizing the influence she has on Nigel, begins to play with him, similar to the way she once manipulated Oscar. She uses her charms to get his attention and draw him into her web. Nigel, like Oscar before him, falls prey to her seductive power. He cannot resist her attraction despite all the warnings he has heard from Oscar. Nini sees Nigel as a new toy that she can play with for her pleasure. The final scene of the movie becomes the climax of all the events. In one scene, Oscar, feeling helpless and realizing that he no longer has any power over his life, decides to commit suicide. This becomes a symbolic end to his torment and dependence on Nini. Nigel, on the other hand, trapped by his desires, finds himself on the verge of destroying his marriage. Fiona, watching this, realizes that their relationship will never be the same again. Nini, having completed her game with Oscar and Nigel, is left alone. She no longer feels the passion and power that gave her life meaning. Her life becomes empty and meaningless.